birthday to spend it with everybody here. So if you want, just text Rob a little happy birthday in the chat. Regarding the chat, we are going to be taking questions at the end of each session. Rob's session should be between 20 and 30 minutes. Then we're going to stop and answer some questions. I'm going to prepare a slideshow. We'll stop for questions, and then we'll round it out with Alex at the end. So you'll have time with your questions. Just go ahead and put those in the chat, and Dee will read those off to us at the end of each session. So without further ado, Rob, thanks for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so what you've seen, what we're going to start with first is, what are the big changes you've seen in the last 3 to 5 years, or 2 to 3 years in studios?
In studios, like the studio facilities in general, TOCs are getting smaller, and we are able to leverage technology to be able to do more remotely. It's been kind of funny. So I joined Inrush earlier this year. I've been in the business for a little bit, but I like to think I'm still, at 47, I'm still, I think, on the younger end of the spectrum of many broadcast engineers in the field. But I'm like way ancient compared to my colleagues at Inrush. And so I can't imagine that anybody else in our company has actually had to do more than maybe repair some wiring connections to a TDM router, let alone like install distribution amplifiers and patch bays and things like that, which certainly were the norm at the start of my career. So it's been interesting for me to get more comfortable with the things that have just been normal for the folks that I work with, who have been doing this really pretty much in an all AOIP environment their whole career. So, for example, bringing all of the I/O for components of an air chain through blades. The first time that somebody suggested that to me, I said, that just seems like the use of a lot of I/O. That why would we not just plug these things together? I said, well, but then you can't correct problems remotely. You can't see the gain staging at different elements. And I said, this just seems like sort of a, to be honest, sort of a scam for the manufacturers to sell us more hardware. And you know what? I will tell you, I'm a convert. It is 1000% the right thing to do to run all of your I/O through blades. And it's been interesting being on the other side. This is the first time that I'm not on the customer side. So I'm still not a year into not being the customer, but instead being the integrator. And I certainly want to be able to deliver the kind of experience that I've been able to deliver for the stations that I've worked for over the years to all of our clients at Inrush. And what I know is there's not enough of us out there to keep all of the stations going that need help. So we're going in and constantly thinking, what can we leverage to ensure that we're able to respond wherever we are to whatever problem comes up for a client. First, kudos to Wheatstone. One of the things that I think is so fascinating, the number of times that I've walked into a facility with a WheatNet plant, there hasn't been an engineer there in sometimes years, or hasn't been somebody who has truly understood the system in a long time. And no one knows. It's running, it's stable, and maybe somebody has brought us in because they want to add a new feature. And we'll say, hey, you also already own this and this and this. Would you like us to help, make those things work for you? And the answer will almost always be, of course, yes. But the biggest trend has been towards smaller and more interconnectedness, being able to see everything remotely that we would have been accustomed to needing to see in person previously. And not only, is this helping stations, shrink their footprints and become more efficient, but it's helping them to rely on resources like Inrush to keep them on the air, even after the installation, which is something that years ago we didn't necessarily need to do in radio, but increasingly today, it's more and more a part of everyday life.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I'll tell you a story. The first time I saw a grossly amount of I/O in a studio had to be 2005. I was working with Kelly Parker, and I was old school like you. You come out of the router, you go to out of the console, you go to the compeller, you go to the EAS, and everything was daisy chained down. And it would certainly require an engineer to go on site if any one of those pieces need to be maintained. Kelly was building these 48 by 48 routers in his on-air studios. They had, and this was for KNBR out in San Francisco. And I said, Kelly, why are these studios so big? Why do we have, and this was the TDM days. And he's like, Jay, I live 45 minutes away. If I put everything on these switchers, if anything, or routers back then, if anything happens, I can just patch around it, get on the train, get into town and fix the problem. So yeah, and then you mentioned blades. Well, one of the big things that blades, and we didn't invent this concept, but blades decentralize the router. Anybody that was been in the business for a while that had an old SAS or something like that, a 64,000, maybe an A and B frame, 128 channels, the infrastructure and what it would take to wire that and then bring everything to that demarc point. It was expensive, it was time consuming, but it also required a technical person. And you really touched on that. That's like, there's not a lot of technical people out there. I came in the business in 1996. I went to the Syracuse SBE in September of 1996. I was 23 years old. And I think at that time, the youngest engineer in the room was 45 years old. So they were about twice my age. And I've sold these people's stuff for years and years and years. But yes, unfortunately, we're not growing new broadcast engineers. And that's where companies like Inrush come in. And, I've been working with Inrush since the beginning. And, the next thing I wanted to talk about, which we rolled out of, is the studio architecture. What's changed from the days with the big PR&E furniture and the turrets and the CD players and the card machines? What changes have you seen from the integration side with that?
And to actually thread two things together there, as you know, Jay, the Inrush was founded when Beasley hired Mike Doris to go and deploy a whole bunch of WheatNet architecture to the greater media stations that they had acquired. And it was an interesting premise. So there was not uniformity amongst all of these stations and all of these studios, but they knew they wanted to deploy their automation system, which happened to be wide orbit. They wanted to have a universal way for implementing that. They, had really standardized on Wheatstone, and they knew that even if they didn't have the money to rebuild all of these studios right then, they wanted to centralize blades in those architectures. And so we're continuing to maintain any number of those stations, including the ones where I started my career. That those DAs are gone and they've been replaced by blades. And so it's been interesting to go back to these places and see the stuff that I built in my early 20s replaced by an early 20-something-year-old Mike Doris, who is now a little bit older himself. And those blades still hanging out there doing their thing. So you've got that piece of it, that once you get into the audio over IP environment, there's just so much more flexibility there. Whether you are wrapping around existing consoles, which is not the way to go if you can avoid it. I mean, way better to just rip the Band-Aid off if you can afford it. But if you have to convert, I don't know, that was probably 100 studios. That's a big nut to crack all at once. So they phased that in, and many of those studios have since been replaced with Wheatstone consoles since then as well. We're not really installing too many studios with turrets at this point. There's far less source equipment in a studio than there used to be. We're bringing in far more audio from a diversity of sources than we once were. And the ability to share those sources amongst stations in a cluster is really great. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we really, relied on the ISDN codec in the turret in the studio to supply that two-way audio to the studio. And today, well, it's any number of IP codecs that are generally centrally located for a cluster of stations, and we're utilizing automated mix minus management via the WheatNet platform, and easily able to share those codecs amongst the studios. Occasionally we will be asked to install CD players for stations that really have a particular need, and it is getting harder and harder to find those CD players. And we have some customers that will ask for turrets, and we'll try to talk them out of it. Say, hey, I know you've had this for forever, and it just feels like you really need it. But let me tell you, that turret's going to be mostly empty even on day one, and then it's going to be even less empty on day two. Should we consider not taking up that real estate from the get-go and instead giving you a more clean, open look in your studio? And if you look at the studios in particular that we've built with WheatNet throughout, public and commercial media alike, it's amazing. Kind of like the open concept space in the home building movement, home renovation movement. You're seeing that more and more in the studio space as well.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot less stuff. And part of it too is the whole visual radio thing. We're going to talk about that in a little while, but you want those sight lines. You don't want big monitors everywhere. You want to be able to look across at the guests. We want to have clean lines for that other content that we're delivering with the audio these days. Do you think there's less studios than there used to be?
Well, and then there's that. Um, and we see that in different iterations. Like I'm running through my head different client footprints that we're dealing with. We have some clients that are building just as many studios as they ever have for a given facility. Are they all filled with people? No. Are there other clients that are getting by with many fewer studios than they used to have? Absolutely. And you well know that we've done some significant installations using WheatNet where we're able to come in and press a button and change the branding of the studio, set it up for that particular set of talent on that particular station, and then the next day part comes in, they push a different button, the branding changes it for a different station, and it's yet different talent. And this is great for, of course, radio, but also for the visual radio aspect of it as well. Being able to do all of that in a much smaller real estate footprint. And we are helping more and more stations consolidate their footprint. And interestingly, of course, this has been going on in commercial for some time, but now we're seeing it happen in public as well for different reasons. And our goal is to equip people with the richest feature set that we can. And certainly, sometimes that means fewer studios in a smaller footprint.
Yeah, we're seeing it as a manufacturer. I'm going to tell you, I'm the biggest fanboy of it because I used to build studios with an analog console and a set of punch blocks, and everything was dedicated. And that room would sit there and function that way for 20 years. As a technology company and somebody that likes to be involved with their customers and their clients, when you get into this architecture, you now have a dynamic facility. And to the lower level guys, I'm like, you're not building on air studio anymore. I'm like, we're building a media center or a media room, sort of like a general purpose kitchen. It could be breakfast in the morning, it's a burger joint in the afternoon. We're serving tacos from 4 to 6 at happy hour. We're at tapas place. We clear the chairs out. But by making a facility dynamic and doing things, which, like I'll say, iHeart, we've got screens everywhere. We're branding electronically. We can go from the Mountain Dew morning show to the Dunkin' Donuts drive home, and we can do all that with video switchers and centralized equipment now that does live in the rack room. But I'm all for somebody using a studio 24 hours a day. One of the worst things you can show me when you bring me to your radio station is that on air room with your three faders up and the three channels on mixing, is that a 1 2 3 1 2 3 all afternoon? No, we take that audio, we shift it back to the TOC, and now that studio is a voice track studio. We might be voice tracking locally for other markets. It's a production room, sort of like the old days. If you build it, they will come. So we always say, yes, when you walk out of that on air room or when that shift is done, push a button, send a macro, let's send that program directly to the transmitter streams, allowing somebody else to come in and use that studio. If you've got less studio, you're going to buy more blades. that's the way I look at it. So, but studios are just one small live part of the contribution. What we are seeing and what leads us on to our next topic is, how does this all translate into a smarter TOC?
Sure, and that's something that I've been grappling with for some time. And I'm just realizing that a comment that you made earlier perhaps was directed at this photo that I'm about to share of my younger brother. And I thought you were referencing something else. I was like, no, he was talking smack. So feel free to continue. I just need to get over to this window here where we will see a much younger Rob Bertrand standing in front of the TOC and CBS Radio New York with a bunch of TDM routers behind me, and a lot of source equipment that no longer exists, as well as some monitoring equipment down in our operations position that allowed us to keep track of our many transmitter sites and audio distribution. Um, I need to pull up some notes here because credit where credit is due. These are panels that my colleague Mike Doris built and equipped me with some information to share here as well. This particular screen builder panel is a facility script, and this is giving the engineering personnel a heads-up display of metering for any particular program source or station. It provides quick on-off of Jelly audio routing, which if you're not familiar, Jelly is a service that enables kind of dynamic pricing and distribution of ad inventory, and there's sort of a unique mode of insertion that is sort of outside of the automation system that happens, and there needs to be some way to get that audio in and out of the system. We're using WheatNet in this case to do that, and in every so often in these environments, something can go wrong with the number of external systems that are handling that insertion, and so just in case something goes wrong, Mike's provided an emergency out from Jelly there. Really, this allows engineering to quickly route automation directly to air on both air chains from a single screen with just a single button press, or route the currently selected studio directly to air. This allows us to know what's going on by displaying the route status. Are we on the primary air chain or the secondary air chain, along with what's actually feeding the stream encoder. And he dutifully whited out the client name who's here. But this is a real panel that is very much in use every day for this particular client. And it's amazing what we've been able to achieve in Screen Builder. Here is a little panel that we built to manage codecs. This combines information about where this shared system resource of a codec is pulled up in the facility, and it allows quick rerouting and panning to that resource by engineering personnel between whether it's a standard bus mix minus or a particularly custom send from the console, or maybe it's a dedicated talkback output from a particular studio. This allows the user to send and dynamically display either dual mono meters, mono or stereo, depending on configuration. So lots of metering options all built into that. And of course, this allows for the codec to be routed quickly and cleared from the same display as well. And all accomplished within the same piece of software. And here finally is an example of just route control. This is a simplified control panel between multiple studios and automation sources being routed to air. It's probably one of the most standard things that we deploy over and over and over again. There's an ARM take function that prevents accidental routing. In the old days, these would have been actual buttons on the console. Pressing ARM displays those take buttons on each potential route. And this panel displays the active route by drawing a green line on whatever is currently active on the UMix. It dynamically displays the currently routed source. And I want to come back to that UMix thing in just a moment, but it dynamically displays the currently routed source in the text field so that the user knows what they are really routing to air. And those are just a couple of quick examples what we do and what we've been able to achieve via Screen Builder. And I believe I've stopped sharing my screen. Yes, my computer has, I don't know, done a strange thing. Anyway, one of the things that we ran into recently with a client was that we're building a new facility for them, and they were trying to solve a problem where they had a hard time doing maintenance to their automation system. And we said, well, why is that? And it said, well, it's the final path in the STL chain, and and we route into the automation server and back out again. And we said, well, why do you do that? And they're in an audio over IP plant, and I said, well, because we always have, like, we always did that with the, our other, we've always done that routing, that final routing through the automation system. And I said, well, that must make maintenance hard. Like, you must not really be able to apply updates to that computer very often. Oh, no, we can't. We don't do that very often. It's pretty rare because we have to do it overnight, and there's an actual outage. And we said, well, why wouldn't you do that through a Umix in your blade? And so, well, I guess we could. We just, we've always done it this way. So, that's how we've done it. We said, well, if you choose us to build your facility, we could help you, design that route change. And this comes up all the time. Just ways that facilities have been built historically that it takes a little bit to wrap your head around. You mentioned the three faders up for Zeta on the console in the studio. I mean, why do that? You could have the three faders up on your Umix, and then that room can go and do other things. So whether it's about maintenance to your computer hardware or freeing up your studio to do other things, it's amazing what you're able to accomplish when you're able to put these tasks off into um, Blade Land.
Yeah, we usually I actually stole that from Australia. I call it a transmission mixer. The guys down under, they bend and break things, and they grew up with CLOTS type stuff. So they were coding and scripting everything, even when they shouldn't have. They still did it. So we learned a lot. But you said something a minute ago that I agree with. Rack rooms are getting smaller. Do you want to touch on that? I know why. Well, A, they don't have a workshop anymore. So they're definitely smaller. But what are some other advancements like multi-channel codecs in a single rack unit, servers? Why are these rack rooms getting smaller?
Yeah, obviously there's certainly the virtualization of things, whether we're talking about virtualization on-prem or virtualization in the cloud. There are, single rack devices that are holding more than they ever have in the past. There's the actual routing infrastructure that can be much smaller than it used to be. Um, then there's the real estate push for these rooms to be smaller. In some cases, we have been told by more the real estate or the finance people for a client, hey, you're going to get 12 racks in this facility. You're going to get 4 racks in this facility. Okay, but the current facility is 30 or 40 racks. I'm like, yeah, you're going to figure out how to fit it into those racks. And so it is both being driven by the technology shift, but in some cases also being driven by the real estate footprint. And in those cases, we are actively, deploying new technical solutions that they maybe didn't have on the radar before. And yes, that can involve a different level of capital investment in new technology. But the finance people are very rightfully noting, well, all right, we're going to make this upfront capital investment, but it's going to ultimately reduce our rent because we're going to be occupying less floor space. And something that I will note that, I've struggled with throughout my career maintaining large major market facilities, just the HVAC footprint alone for a big TOC, it costs a lot of money to run. The bigger the system, the more complex the maintenance is, the more complex the control systems are, the more complex the feed system is. Maybe you've got a rooftop chiller to feed primarily your TOC cooling. And if you shrink that room, it's fascinating what you're able to achieve with, let's say, if you really want to get down to it, a couple of mini splits that, one fails, okay, well, your others are still running and your maintenance costs drop dramatically, your energy costs drop dramatically. And 15 years ago, you'd say, oh, Rob, really, you could deploy a series of mini splits to a major market TOC. I wouldn't have said yes 15 years ago, but today I would say, oh yeah, and I've done it, and there's lots of defensible reasons to do it, not just from the standpoint of saving money, but it's also redundancy. If one of those systems fails, then the others keep on going, and there's much less heat being generated by these smaller components than there once was. So, there's just so many arguments to shrink the TOC.
Yeah, and I'm a supporter of this. Some people say, well, the accountants are wrecking broadcast. No, the accountants are trying to make sure that these broadcasters are around to serve the public for another 5 or 10 years. And like you said, I've been in projects before where it's been delayed 6 months because the roof couldn't support the chiller that we needed for the TOC because not everybody was working together. And that's where I'm going to give like Inrush and integrators a shout out here. Um, us, we don't know what we don't know. And I've been building studios at Wheatstone for almost 30 years. I still, when I walk on site and see your guys and I'm looking around a rack, why are you doing this? Why are we doing that? I learn stuff all the time. Obviously, that knowledge isn't free. You guys charge for your service, but done properly, planned well, a good integrator will pay for themselves over the time because you're talking about things like HVAC, electricity. Do you really have redundant power? Do we have two feeds? Is there two plugs in every single rack? Where should you save money? Where shouldn't you save money? And then again, now it's just not. You're just not buying a console from Jay anymore. You're not buying a 12 fader console with AB inputs. You're getting into, it's like an automation system. You're getting into a long-term relationship with what vendor you choose to work with. Now, you have intercoms, you have mixing, you have routing, you have transmission, you have streaming, and you have automation. Those are 6 key things that make up any broadcast facility. And it's going to be hard to find any 1 or 2 individuals that are an expert at all of those. Inrush has a team of people. Other integrators have teams of people, then they collaborate and they bring that all together. So anybody that's out there watching this webinar, if you're uncomfortable or you can't do it yourself, bring an integrator in, get a different perspective, create bills of material. Again, you don't know what you don't know. And I think that's where, and it doesn't matter where we are in the world, we are not growing new broadcast engineers. They are an endangered species. And therefore, and every single country has a number 1 or a number 2 integrator. You know, Traditionally in America, our stuff was bought and installed by the chief engineer. There was integrators doing public projects and hospitals and things like that, but mostly all of our stuff was designed to be installed by the end user. We try to make it easy. I think our stuff lasts too long. You highlighted earlier, Rob, that you've got people that have been running Wheatstone facilities that don't know anything about them. Yes, it says a lot to the product, a lot to Wheatstone, but it also tells me that customer is only using about 5 or 10% of what they can be, and they need to bring in other people like Inrush to tell them, or just to give them ideas to start thinking outside the box. Things are getting smaller. We're leveraging technology. In addition to the TOC shrinkage, again, we are seeing multi-channel codecs. We're seeing servers. I've got some Cox radio stations where I've got 5 blades at transmitter sites. That's 10 free RU in the studio or in the rack room with the space between that we've extended the network on fiber and wirelessly out to the site. So that hardware that would not traditionally have sitting there at the studio. And I always try to make it look, you're paying the same amount to house your morning show as you are the general manager or the Zeta computer. Real estate's real estate. You're paying per square foot. So obviously, if you're able to do that, shrink your footprint, leverage technology, interconnect these systems, it's going to make for a smaller, more efficient operation. That's the hands down.
And something I'll tag on to that I've been kind of advocating where people will listen. So people are here listening to us today. So I'll mention this. We often think about this, especially in the commercial world, from the real estate footprint standpoint, the cost reduction standpoint. I've had the good fortune of working both in major commercial and major public stations. And something that I've been saying to folks in public media for a while is we in public media have made a big point of saying that we want to meet audiences physically where they are. We want to deliver performance spaces for engagement and things like that. And oftentimes in public, we wind up building very large facilities, and we are happy to help any broadcaster, public or commercial, build a very large facility for sure. But I'm also encouraged at the idea of working with smaller broadcasters and communities that typically would have had their studios located outside of the central point of the community that they served. And if you can imagine, now with the need for smaller TOCs, because maybe some stuff has moved to the cloud or maybe some stuff has moved to the transmitter side, as you point out, we don't need as much equipment in-house, and that one or two studios can serve more functions than they used to be. So imagine moving in, stations moving into retail spaces that have been abandoned downtown, not as some, remote studio, but actually as their footprint, that between that and some folks probably working from home from one day to the next, that we actually need smaller facilities. And being able to do this engineering with both a longevity standpoint in terms of making financially the operations more sustainable, but also deepening the community engagement that we can achieve by making these technical shifts is huge. And these are the things that get me up in the morning and get me really excited to do what we do.
Yeah, I'm big on community radio. Obviously, it's like our farm league for bigger broadcasters. Community radio guys are great to work with. They ask questions, they get a real budget, they go get the money, and they execute the project. And they tend to be really good. I think you're going to see a lot more resurgence in the mid and small markets in our industry in the coming months fiscally. And a lot of the big guys have already moved. They're in their new house and they're not going to leave until their lease is over. I mean, ownership rules and stuff change. So, I think that the mid and small market guys really benefit from this technology, and there will be a lot of growth in that. So I share your excitement in that, definitely. Well, we've got some questions for you, Rob. Dee, do you want to go take care of those for us?
Yeah, I thought really, I don't know who posed this question, but I thought it was really a question I often have is how do the engineers' capabilities and skills in, like, say, IT technology, how does that affect the development of new studios? I mean, when you enter a a project, do you look at the capabilities of the engineer and think, hey, can I match this studio to his capabilities?
The reality is, and I'll say this first from the end user standpoint, again, I've been in the stations up until this year. I'm really proud of the teams that I've been able to put together and the companies that I've been a part of, and it is not just hiring a single engineer with one skill set. The number of skills that are needed to make a modern facility sing and sing well are often just too many to be housed in a single person. So what we usually wind up finding is that if we're coming into a facility where there is an engineer already on the team, we will be there to help extend their capabilities. We will be able to do some level of training for sure, teaching some, basic level of this is how you administer Pathfinder. This is, I'm sorry, this
It's
is
fine.
how you no, no, mixing my systems, but
All the
the
same now.
same
It's all
core
good.
of
All good. Keep going. Continue.
the same core interface of Navigator, and what's great is that we really are able to teach these capabilities in ways that would have been too hard in the past with a lot of folks. But even then, we will we'll do these we'll have these conversations, have these mentoring conversations a number of times, and sometimes realize, yeah, I'm sorry, we're not going to be able to teach you how to do this. However, we will be able to continue assisting you. We'll be, it seems like you are prepared to take on this chunk of the challenge, and if you want, we can continue helping you from here to here. There is that piece of it. The other piece is that sometimes we're encountering more IT folks than broadcast engineers at this point. So one WheatNet facility I recently visited, there was no broadcast engineer. They hadn't had a broadcast engineer in a long time. They're owned by a university. The university IT architect is actually the person maintaining their facility. Now, I will tell you, he made some choices that were different than I might have made as a broadcast engineer. But you know what? At the end of the day, he knew how to get the audio from point A to B using WheatNet because he was obviously very well versed in networking technologies. And so in that case, we were able to say to the general manager who hired us, here's a couple of things that you might want to change, but you know what? You're well taken care of by this university network architect, and what an amazing thing that you have that resource at your disposal. So in cases where we don't have broadcast engineers, but we're able to find IT people, sometimes we're able to make even better use of them in the broadcast engineering side than we would have been able to in the past.
Well, we probably have time for one more question for you, Rob. Tom Delamay, I think he's actually mentioned that he's going to be building a new facility. It's not going to be all Wheatstone. Thank you, Tom. But he has a staff of 2 highly capable engineers and an IT individual. But he's wondering, it's a medium-sized market, 6 studios. What are some of the top 5 things that he should be thinking about at this point? I think he's pretty early in the stage there.
So radio news is what I've done throughout my career. It's the thing that I love more than anything. I will tell you, and this has been hard for me as an engineer to navigate, because I love using broadcast technology to solve the problems of our broadcast news operations. And let me tell you, it is sometimes deflating as a broadcast engineer to bring lots of wonderful hardware to bear for what are increasingly end users, content creators that don't come out of broadcasting and sometimes don't even necessarily really want to learn broadcast hardware. They're going to be slacking files from one point to the other. They're going to be doing stuff in Audition on their laptop and might not even log on to the computer in the studio. And so what I and my colleagues find ourselves increasingly advocating in newsroom situations in particular is use your screen builder technologies, leverage those blades and the routing that you're able to do there, and be selective about the hardware that you deploy. Sometimes hardware is still going to win. Somebody recently suggested to me, oh, we're going to put a glass interface in front of on-air news talent who is self-operating. I said, no, that person who is talking and reading and doing all these things simultaneously, we're going to destroy their world. They need buttons. They need a real console. They need real buttons to push, real faders. But you know what? Out in the newsroom, where typically we would have distributed mixers before, they're really going to be doing all that editing on their computer. So let's give them screen builder panels. Let's make sure that the editor has hardware in front of them with buttons and a microphone and all those things that are very tactile. But I would say look to balance software solutions as much as hardware, and try as best as you can to really look through the eyes of your end users as they exist in 2025, not the end users that we perhaps grew up with at the beginning of our careers. And let me tell you, that's been a real hard challenge for me. But it's been rewarding in the sense that I feel like I've been able to help clients stretch their budgets that much further.
Hey, thanks,
And
Rob.
yeah, and Thomas, I would also say that I touched on it last week, your network. Figure out what you want to do, look at your floor plan, get your network installed, the dual core switches, your edge switches, make sure it's on good cabling. That is the foundation. It doesn't matter what you plug into it. If that infrastructure isn't perfect and finely tuned, you're going to have issues forever. So I always say, let's work on the Cisco network. Then we do the IO lists. Let's build you and find the true solution for what your facility actually needs. Not what they're doing in Chicago, not what they're doing in Baton Rouge, but what your folks need to do, and come up with a unique workflow that is flexible but extremely stable. And that's where you got to start with a good foundation. So, any other questions at all? Hi, Sherry. Hi, Chris Alexander. Aaron had a good question here. Do you want to read that, Dee?
Looking forward. Yes, he said he's touching on, he's really talking about something that made me stop and think about the advancing technology and, making our infrastructure simpler so that really anybody can do it. So that at some point, maybe there's no need for this hardware anymore. But I'm not sure that that's really where we're headed here. It sounds like it's like everything else, where the system has to be a pretty simplified system in order for it to be usable.
it's walking that kind of middle road. I
Yeah.
think that there will always be some need for hardware. I mean, the number of folks that will just kind of broadly say to us like, well, can't we just stick it all in the cloud now? And the answer is, well, we can put more in the cloud than we used to, but also you may not want to move all of the things to the cloud that you think you might want to, because you're going to be facing ingress, egress costs for that bandwidth. But also there are some critical functions that you really do want to have on-prem, and there are real reasons to use that hardware to connect from point A to B in some cases, in other cases to give that tactile surface to the talent when they are mixing. But yeah, there are times that we don't need to deploy quite as much hardware as we used to. Do we need to have the number of well-equipped edit booths for audio mixing that we once did? Well, it breaks my heart to say it as somebody who loves well-equipped edit booths. The reality is that we can probably get by with a couple in a facility, whereas maybe we needed, a half dozen or a dozen in the past. And in some facilities where they're really trading off between, hey, if I have a production studio that's only in use sporadically throughout the day, do I really need another room too? Well, depending on the market size, maybe the answer is no. Depending on how we leverage the technology, we can get you down to the point where you can use this one production studio and one on-air studio, because your on-air studio also becomes your production studio when it's not actually on the air. And the rest of the time, you may be doing this production on your laptop as opposed to physically in a room. And yeah, there's just a lot of shifting things. And I think for those of us on the technology side, um, not just keeping up with the technology, but keeping up with the user inclinations is really, really important. And I've been asked a number of times to build things that I don't know that the intended end users will actually use. Happy to do it, makes my heart sing, but I know that those things are not going to necessarily see usage. By the way, we will actually tell our clients when we think that they're spending money unnecessarily, and sometimes they will say thank you, and sometimes they will say, build it anyway. We know that we really need this. And okay, our job is to do what you tell us to do.
Awesome. Couple questions. I'm going to deal with these as I go through a slideshow, just because we always talk and run out of time. I'm going to start my slideshow here, and then we can ask what I want to do now is I want to show you guys, not that one, some facilities that are out there. These are a lot of American facilities, but what I want to show is modern rack rooms and the benefit of leveraging technology, decentralizing the router, and bringing blades into service or anybody else's IO. This is an Inrush facility up in Boston, houses 6 radio stations. You'll notice you see blades in every single rack. Every station has its own rack, its own equipment. It's really easy for maintenance. It's distributed. Anything can go anywhere. So this is typically a modern rack room, and it's pretty much perfect except for the one blank panel in rack 3 that's missing. Talking
Thanks,
about
Jay.
talking about density. This is a town square install. This is a modern Zeta install to our left here. You have 2 cables. You have a WheatNet cable that's doing 8 channels of audio out of those, and then you got a regular Zeta. And then if you look over to the right, you'll see the color-coded Zeta network and then the Wheatstone stack. More IO. If you look at the ones on the right, we color code. Drivers have a red cable. Analog has an orange cable. WheatNet is red. These are modern installs and no punch blocks. Everything's labeled. When you're building a facility, you want to think of the person that's going to come in after you. Everybody gets about, unless you're Rob, you get to one big facility about every 20 years, maybe every 10 or 15 years. You don't get many chances as a broadcast engineer or a radio mid or small market to build a new facility. It comes along like every 10 or 15, 20 years, usually based on leasing and stuff. Here's another beautiful install where you see all the network over to the right, you see the blades, you see the star guides, everything's color coded. It looks simple. And I will tell you, there's two schools of thought here. You can be the dongle guy. You can use these little Studio Hub dongles. I enjoy them. They make XLRs, they make RCAs, they make bare ends. The Town Square guys have rolled out hundreds of studios of WheatNet. You won't find one dongle in any of their installs. They make every single cable. They make every patch cable. They make every audio cable, as you can see down here. In 10 years, I've never had a cable failure or an emergency call from any of these sites due to wiring. Again, you're only as good as the infrastructure. Here we'll have codecs, multi-channel codecs over here, but these are just a few examples of installations and how people are wiring up to this new technology. Bonneville, San Francisco, this is a big plant. We did WheatNet, studios, Zeta servers, no sound cards, no broadcast tool switchers. And then again, as Rob pointed out earlier about these facilities, rack rooms can get smaller. We're getting rid of ACUs, sign system boxes, broadcast tool switchers, Bob boxes, ton of punch blocks. Chris Verdi told me that you can sell your used Chrome block on eBay for like $100. Never knew that. In all these pictures I'm going to show you, you're not going to see one punch block. Everybody does point-to-point wiring. It minimizes your footprint. It's easier to support. If you want to know where something is, you go to the router, you go to Navigator, and you look at it. Soft. Things are going soft. Town Square elects in their mid and small markets to use glass consoles. We make a product for that, so you don't have to build your own console. This is a big SEN in Australia. They're a big glass LXE user. They didn't give their users a choice. They said, we're going glass and everybody's going to have to get used to it. But when I walk in there and I see the younger people, they've never moved a linear fader. They never grabbed a monitor pot and turned it. They're used to things, their fingers sliding things up and down on screens and pads. And they don't need that tactile feedback because they've never had it. Sort of like the guys that go around with earbuds, and I'll ask ask younger people, I'm like, have you ever felt music? And they're like, what? We've all been to a concert before. We've felt a kick drum go through our chest. Times are changing. The customer is changing. Audio processing isn't this magic that it used to be anymore. Here's a few more Town Square facilities here. You'll see good, clean cabling, things laid out right. This is the heart of your operation. You can live without studios. I can get your program on the air out through here. And Aaron, you had one question, do we still need radio? I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say you still need radio because to me, radio is only around for one thing, public service. And we still need to do that on the local level when there's emergencies. The case last year during the hurricane up in Asheville, or hurricane 7,000 feet in the mountains, unheard of. Had a lot of friends up there. They got all of their information and they were able to coordinate with other people and state agencies through the radio. I mean, iHeart did an amazing job getting that complex back up on air in Nashville. So yeah, I think radio is going to be around for a long time still. Guys, when you buy one of these AOIP systems, there are no more bud boxes. There are no more connectors. There's no more steering diodes. There's no more soldering irons. Every mix, every source, every destination can be monitored. It can be metered. It can be controlled with a simple mouse and a GUI. And here is a Town Square tie line screen where we have all of our shared resources. We display where they are. We've got intercom talkback built into it. We got connection status over here. No doubt that we are consolidating studios. We're consolidating radio properties. In some cases, we'll feed 3 or 4 markets out of one building now. You need to know where everything is and to be able to get a quick way to go and listen to it. The days of walking into a room with an XY controller and trying to pick a source and a destination, these screens allow you to do this extremely quick. You mentioned UMix. This is Beasley, Boston. Dennis and his team can walk up and touch any one of these buttons and listen and look at any part of the air chain. And if one of those meters isn't moving, they know where to go. In the analog days, these guys were wiring up meters, silence detections, and everybody had their homebrew system for that. All of this stuff was is dynamic now. And then if you do have an integrator, nobody has to be there. I saw Ronan mentioned earlier from Ireland. He's in remote Ireland. He can touch any of his radio stations anywhere in the country with a remote session. That's what this technology gives you. This is I forgot who this is. This is iHeart in Grand Rapids, and this was an early screen and for switching and everything. And the same thing, he's got Zephyrs and he's got Comrex units. Here's all his resources. We did this. Mike did this great script. You know, WheatNet has all of your sources, your microphones, cues, outputs for speakers. Natively, it's an intercom system if programmed correctly. And this is a Studio 4 little talkback system that we made in Screen Builder. This is your new newsroom, Rob. You got a little $300 application controlling a utility mixer and a blade. That's all they need in New Jersey. That's just a simple talkback room. WBZ routing control, UMixes. iHeart uses this in Charlotte. You know, these are things, and these are old guys. I'm proud of them for using it. Alex, you see what this is?
No, what?
My good customer, Greg Armstrong in Columbus, built his own video switcher. Not to take away from you, not everybody can roll their own, video switcher, but he's like, Jay, I've got the microphones. I know what channel's on. I can do this all in Screen Builder. So he didn't have to buy your product, but he built his own. Not everybody is this skilled, okay? So leading up to you, Alex, what do you see in the studio? Cameras. I see at least 4 cameras in the studio for radio. Here's another one. This is Nebraska. Look at how many cameras that we see. Now everybody is moving towards the video stuff, and it's becoming more and more important. So here's Chicago Public. Steve, this is the one. I don't know if this is the last studio Brian did, but lots and lots of cameras. I was working with Steve Wright from day one. He talked about the video aspect with his radio studios. So for that, I'll stop sharing, and I'm going to turn this over to Alex Bonello now, who can discuss his HDVMixer with you guys.
Thank you so much, Jay, for the introduction. I think I've started sharing my screen.
Yeah.
Yep. Perfect. Okay, so let's talk visual radio and the visual radio revolution. We will see how to automate video productions, how stations are doing that, how they are streaming and they're engaging new audiences. We will be talking about the HDVMixer product. My name is Alex Bonello. I'm president of Insoft, developers of HDVMixer. And I'm going to walk you through 15 years and 1,100 studios that have gone visual. So the evolution of radio, we all know it. We started with traditional radio. Then in the 2000s, we moved to digital streaming. And now we're going visual, right? So for all those naysayers out there, radio isn't dying. It's transforming. At least that's how we see it. And let's see the monetization and new revenue streams that visual radio brings to the table. So we have radio and we have visual radio, and this is a side-by-side comparison. So on both of them, you can publish the content to audio platforms. Now you can also do podcasts, which are very popular. Of course, audio-only podcasts for traditional radio. And what visual radio provides, it's a plethora of new outlets, new social media outreach, where you can stream live or pre-recorded content. And by adding to radio video, you are amplifying the impact. You're still producing the same content, it's the same product, but now you can monetize in new ways, right? And what we see is that there is a 15 to 30% ad revenue growth when a station goes visual, right? And that's the reason why broadcasters are embracing visual radio like crazy. 60% of US stations will go visual by, and you can try to guess the year there, by 2027. And that's not me saying it, that's the NAB saying it, right? And it makes sense. Younger audiences expect visuals. They want to have their lovely shows and watch their lovely stations in TikTok, in YouTube, in Instagram, in those platforms where they are used to get all their content from. So if you're not streaming video in the next couple of years, you are invisible to the next generation, right? So that's important, and also you need to bring talent, right? You need to bring new hosts, and these new younger generations would expect the station to be in all these platforms, right? So HDVMixer is the innovation behind visual radio. And why do we say that? Well, HDVMixer automates video production in radio studios. So it does the capturing, it does the camera switching, and it streams the shows live. And all that happens with no dedicated crew required, right? Not only that, but for the engineers, this is a single cable solution as long as your studio it's an AOIP studio, right? So the AI inside HDVMixer will do the camera switching. AI will switch the branding from one show to the next. It will switch lower thirds and logos. And when you upload a media asset, a graphic, let's say the Christmas graphic, the new logo or whatever, it can be shared automatically between all your HDVMixer across all your markets nationwide. It's not that you have to send that same graphic or clip to all the stations through Dropbox. Everything works together, right? So let's see HDVMixer under the hood. What is it that you need to install to get this up and running? So if you have an AOIP facility, you are familiar with your control surface, the AOIP switch, and the IP88 blade or blades that you will have in that studio. You will be adding an HDVMixer on-prem server that will do all the video rendering. You will be connecting it through a separate NIC card to your LAN switch, and then you will connect cameras to that LAN switch. If the LAN switch is PoE and the cameras are PoE, and if you choose NDI cameras, then with only one cable, you have camera control, video over IP, because this protocol NDI is like WITNET, but for video, right? You have the same flexibility and it would stream the video in real time through your network. Then you will access the system through a web user interface. So you don't need a KVM there. The HDVMixer server can be in the rack room and you access the system through a web UI. And you will probably want to connect some confidence monitors so that your talent can see what is it that we are streaming live, right? And let's see, this is a plug and play installation. We do the commissioning, the setup. We talk with your integrator. We will make sure that Navigator cross points are configured properly and everything is up and running. And we will train not only your digital team members, but we will also train the AI to do the switching as you want it to look like, right? So all that is on us. And this is one of these systems in real life. This is Huskers Radio Network. Jay showed the same studio, but from a different angle. So you can see there the web UI pulled up in one of the monitors. You can see some cameras there and a confidence monitor. So as you can see, the studio looks normal, but adds this new layer of power, right? This is another studio from Hubbard Radio in West Palm Beach. Again, you have a web UI, you have some cameras. In this particular case, they are using POV cameras, and the one on the top left here, that's a PDC camera, right? So you can mix and match camera types depending on what is it that you need to accomplish. And you can now ask me, okay, Alex, but I have a legacy studio. Can I do visual radio from a legacy facility? Absolutely. There you have on the right the user interface, the cameras, even you have a confidence monitor there, right? So yep, you can do it from anywhere. And what about the user interface, you may ask? Okay, how do I access it? Okay, you just pull up a web browser tab. You go to hdvmixer.com. On the top right corner, you will see a login button. You enter your email and password, and then you will be presented with all the stations that your organization has and that you have access to, right? So if you have access to only one station, well, you will see only one button there to access KTTH out of Seattle. But maybe you add a couple of more studios on the road in Salt Lake City, maybe you add another one, or one more, or even another one in Sacramento, or another in San Francisco, Denver, or a third one in Salt Lake City, and so forth, right? So you can end up with all your studios throughout all your facilities in one place. And to access any of these studios, you just click on one of them and we're in. So we will click on the Cairo 97.7, 97.3, sorry, and boom, we are in, right? We're inside the facility. We see that currently there's no one in the studio. They are streaming as late because there's no show going on. We see the AI mode on over there. So the AI is taking over, and it will automatically switch and start streaming when it's supposed to. And if instead of clicking on this station, we would have clicked on KTTH, now we see a show going on. We see that they are streaming like to more than 6 social media accounts. The AI is on, so all these streams have been started when the show started by the AI. The AI also started recording the show, it's switching the camera, and once the show is over, it would stop the recording, would stop the stream, and so forth, right? So it's super, super, super easy to override if you want, or leave just the automation, and it will run forever, right? And I would now want to address some questions, some frequently asked questions, so that you don't have to ask them. I will go really quick through this section. How many cameras do I need? Well, so you will need 1 camera per microphone in that studio, plus 1 extra camera for the wide shot. So for instance, here, you see that each microphone position has its camera, and then the wide shot is shooting this image that we see here, right? So you have 5 microphones there plus a 6th wide shot camera. And if we log into the user interface, you see in the first row there, cameras 1 through 5, and then the wide shot, which is camera 6, right? And the user can click on any of these scenes, and it will override the AI and will send it on air. And of course, if you click on the AI again, it will start auto switching again, right? Of course, you can have more than 1 camera per microphone. So here in this studio from Univision in Houston, Texas, they have 8 cameras in a studio with only 3 microphones. The first row is all the cameras that they have, but they have a couch, so they have an extra area in that studio. That's why they have some additional cameras, right? And what about streaming video and hurting my PPM ratings? Well, in fact, if you PPM encode the audio of your video streams, you can boost those numbers. Okay, so it won't hurt you; it will help you. And what about if I have an analog console? This question comes up a lot. Can I still do visual radio? Absolutely, you can. We manufacture some interfaces called SmartCam 876 that connect through USB to the computer, and on the other side you have all the analog inputs for microphones and GPIs, so that the AI can have the same information as if you had an AOIP facility. Other stations want to mute the audio during commercial breaks, and even some of them want to play video commercials while the terrestrial commercial break is happening. We can totally do that. We can even pull a traffic log from a traffic system and play video commercials, which are totally independent from the on-air commercials. What about profanity delays? If the facility uses profanity delays, would this preclude us from doing visual radio? Not at all. HDVMixer can delay the video in the same amount as the profanity delay delays the audio so that they lip sync perfectly well. Cox Media out of Tampa, for instance, is using this with great success. Can we record each camera independently for post-production editing? Absolutely. If you have a major guest and you want to do that, you have an ISO recorder function where you select which cameras you want to record and you can record them and do post-production switching. And what about if a host goes remote? Does that break visual radio? Not at all. You can send this remote host a link that he will click on. It will pop up on a web browser, and he will be sending back to the studio video. And let me show you how that looks like. So, for instance, in WSB on the morning show, they have one of the co-hosts working from home, this gal on the right. She works from her New York apartment, and as soon as she starts talking, the AI switches to her camera. And if the host in Atlanta is talking and she's talking at the same time, it will do a split screen between the two, right? So the AI still produces a great compelling video production. What if we don't want to live stream? If we just want to record and post short clips for TikTok, for YouTube Reels, you can definitely do that with HDVMixer. We have a web-based video trimmer that you can use for that. So let me show it really quick. So you have all your recordings on the left. You click on one, and on the right, you can select the start and end time of the recording and click on clip, and the clip will be cut from that original recording, and you can use that for posting, right? So you have some additional questions in the swag bag. So if you then want to check it, there's some more information there and a checklist for all of you who want to start thinking on going the visual radio route for your studios, right? And whenever you're ready to reach more viewers, engage more fans, and earn more revenue, just contact us or contact Inrush or contact Jay, and we're all a team here.
We are. I Skip from Rima down in New Zealand's a big Weedy user, and he had a question for you. He says, does HDVMixer integrate with tools like Zoom for remote guests, or will it just be treated as a separate audio video source from a Zoom PC?
That's a great question. Yeah, we integrate with Teams, with Google Meet, and with Zoom. Yeah, and yeah, and when you have video callers, or however you want to call them, but yeah, they are video callers. Yeah, you normally have them on Zoom. So these links that HDVMixer sends, it's normally for people that work for the station, hosts and co-hosts. But certainly for the general public, you would just share a Zoom link, and that can be an extra camera source, and the video switching will happen also with someone on Zoom as well. Great question.
Yeah, it was a good question. What about when you're doing encoding? Are you just using the station's existing encoders, or are you getting a separate encoder shipped to these guys for your stuff?
Let's see. In the server that we normally ship to the stations, we do all the video encoding in software. Yeah.
Okay.
So we bring in the audio. Yeah, we bring in the audio from an external audio processor, which would be the same audio processor that you use for your audio streams, and then we encode that audio with the video inside the HDVMixer box.
There's a WheatNet question here. I guess I'll answer it. It was a good question. It says, WheatNet requires a lot of bandwidth. How does integration affect the performance of the switches? To touch on WheatNet, just think of every stream as 5 meg. So you got a 20 fader console in the studio. You're not using a mic. You are pulling in 20 individual unique multicast addresses from the TOC to the console. It's 100 meg. It's nothing. And then what you're sending out of that studio back, let's say if it was in 20 codecs, you'd have another 100 meg going back, maybe some talkbacks. So you're only using a couple 100 meg, worst case scenario, on a link. I don't typically tell anybody to worry about bandwidth with your WheatNet system until you're well over 100 blades. If you wanted to move 100 channels from one rack to another rack, that's only 500 meg. It's half the link. Now you're talking into big, huge purchases. But yeah, I joked earlier, and I really mean this, because it's multicast, it's gremlins on your network, your bandwidth is food, don't feed them after midnight, and you're looking at about 5 meg per stream for any WheatNet. It's a little less than that, but if you're doing a wireless link and you're really, you only got a fixed amount of bandwidth, you figure 5 megs per stream. That allows for any bursts or anything like that. But you can reach out to me directly, and I can get you some actual numbers. If you're using WheatNet, I can mimic what you're doing here, and I can give you actual real-time graphs using cacti on the bandwidth uses of Wheatstone. So, any other questions, D? Guys,
Oops, sorry. We're
No,
kind of running over here, so
yeah,
we probably should wrap it
I
up.
think we're good.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're good. And
Well, I actually had a question for Alex. I thought was kind of interesting. I had a conversation the other day about performance studios. We've seen a lot of that in the major market public stations. Are we seeing more of that on the commercial end? You would be the guy that would see that first, huh?
Yeah, and actually, we've done several performance studios. For instance, the first that comes to mind is WBZ out of Chicago. They have a really nice performance studio, and they went with visual radio in all of their 6 studios. So they have 5 radio studios plus the performance studio. And all 6 of them have HDVMixer, which for them is great because they can use the same graphics during a live concert than for any of the regular broadcasts, right? I'm seeing here another question from Avin. What's the latency between the audio sync? Can it push the live stream simultaneously to multiple sources at the same time? So it can push the live stream to up to 25 destinations simultaneously, and you can do that with just one click. You select them all, you create a group, and you can call that group, let's say, morning show. And either the AI, when it's time to start that show, or us manually, the user manually will click there, and it will start streaming to all those social media accounts that the morning show needs to be streamed to, right? And regarding latency between the audio sync, we do audio sync. So any audio sync that you have, any audio delay that you have, I don't know if you're talking there about the profanity delay, but we can delay the video in excess of 180 seconds. So we can mostly accommodate any audio delay that you may have.
I guess the last one was Tiago asking about your NDI.
Yeah,
I've seen it, Tiago. I've seen it with Ubiquiti stuff in my home system, where I've had it completely. I've tried everything that I know as a human, but I run WheatNet at my house, and I have a big Ubiquiti surveillance system at my house. And I tried to put them on the same switch. I tried to do VLANs. I did everything I possibly knew. I could never get it to work right. I separated my WheatNet off the video stuff, and I haven't had a problem in 10 years. Alex, have you seen what he's talking about here? Because he's using a PC, so you've got probably 2 NICs and a PC. And I'm not sure how you're going to give that the best isolation.
Gotcha. Yeah,
Gotcha.
I haven't read his question in full, but we normally suggest to have two NIC cards, and don't even try it. Yeah, you have a WITNET system that's running. You have a WITNET NIC card, and then you have the LAN card, because there's a ton of bandwidth that you will be using on the LAN side of things. Not only the streams, but the cameras are, as they are NDI, which is video over IP, they can eat up in excess of 100 megabits per second per camera. So you don't want to mess around with both things on the same NIC card. And there's a question here, I think. Can you import lower thirds? Frenchy asks this. Yeah, absolutely. The station builds the lower third. Actually, in the swag bag, you will have visual radio checklist. And in that checklist, one of the points is come up with your own branding, graphics, backgrounds, and lower thirds. Yeah. So that's on the stations, digital designers. Yeah.
Awesome.
Great.
Well, we ran over today. It's all been great content. I want to thank Rob and I want to thank Alex for your contributions today.
Thanks for having us.
Professionals, like always.
Thank you so much.
Really do it. And yeah, well, and guys, everybody, thank you for attending from around the world. Next week, we've got some of my really dear friends. We've got Nate and we've got Jeff Ziegler and from RCS. It'll be a great presentation. We're going to really get into the integration with RCS and Wheatnet. And then we're going to talk about with Philippe from Neo Group. Many people have used his winners in the Neo software for years. He's developed a new VoIP phone system that's totally integrated with Wheatnet. So we've got 3 great presenters coming on next week. I'll give a shout out to Alex and Robert, and look forward to seeing everybody next week on Class 3. Thank you for attending.